Okay, so when you're thinking about developing your mid-career resume, some of you may not have had the opportunity or the need really to update a resume since you maybe entered your field. There are some significant differences between more of an entry-level resume and a mid-career resume. So I just want to take a moment to highlight some of those. And this will really frame how we're going to discuss the rest of our conversation this evening. So on entry-level resumes, you're usually including very broad experiences. You're including everything from internships, paid and unpaid experiences, and sometimes even experiences that aren't directly related to the field that you've entered. At the entry-level phase, you really have few accomplishments really to focus on. You also are likely to really focus heavily on your skills and on the future success that you think you'll have. And that's what employers are really focused on, is being able to see your education, the skills that you've attained, and they're making an assessment that you're going to be able to produce for them in the future. For mid-career resumes, you're in a very different place. Typically, we indicate that people are in their mid-career somewhere between 5, 7 to 10 years within their particular field of study. So usually at that point you have specialized experience. Your resume is only going to include the information that you need in order to showcase the skills that are important for a promotion. That could be internal, or it could be for a promotion or a new position outside. There is less emphasis on actually selling your technical knowledge and more on sharing information about proven success. So the mid-career resume really focuses a great deal more on sharing accomplishments that a future employer or a new supervisor in a perhaps higher level position might be able to see as evidence of your success. Your education and your skills that you've developed, particularly given that you are all in a professional program, can be used to pivot toward a new role or a new promotion. So traditionally on a mid-career resume, your education doesn't take center stage. But given that you are all attaining a new credential, a new degree, your education can be used as a pivot point for you, either to leadership positions or senior technical positions, or maybe even to move from a more technical area, maybe into a senior position that focuses more on business development or leadership. And the ability to focus on those specific accomplishments comes from the narrative that you're able to create. So again, there are fairly nuanced differences between the two types of resumes. So all standard formatting rules apply for mid-career resumes. Keep in mind that you only have about 20 seconds, if that, to make an impact on the person who's reading it. Working with recruiters and hiring managers for many years, they all tell me how much more difficult it is to select the right candidate because of the sheer volume of applications. So you really have a very short period of time to make a lasting first impression. Realistically, 20 seconds is about enough time to read 20 to 30 words. So your real goal in creating the document is to entice the reader to keep reading, to read beyond what we'll talk about in a minute, which is your summary statement. Your document should be ideally no longer than 1 to 2 pages, 2 pages at most. Typically 7 to 10 years of experience per page. And so, typically an entire career can fit on 2 pages. The most relevant information and the key information should be on the first page. Again, that 20 seconds, some managers won't even look at a second page. So everything that you need to share with a manager should be on that first page. And you only need to go back 7 to 10 years at most of relevant experience showcased. And that means that you're selectively choosing what to include on your resume. Whereas your entry-level resume probably include everything you did, your mid-career resume is only going to include the relevant information. And sometimes that means leaving off specific positions. Sometimes it means only including certain roles that are relevant to a particular promotion that you're seeking. So it doesn't have to be an extensive list of your experience, and in fact, it really shouldn't be. So when we talk about the content of your mid-career resume, there are a number of headings or sections that you should always include. And I will showcase to you what this looks like in an actual resume format in just a few minutes. But you should always include your contact information. And there has been a bit of a shift over the last several years. That contact information certainly should be your name, first and last name. You can include middle initial or middle name if you like. It should also include a telephone number. If you have a cell phone and a landline, pick one. Only include one phone number, and then only include one email address. And typically, we encourage people to use Gmail accounts because employers have said that, and this sounds a little bit silly, but employers have indicated that either institutional email addresses like a JHU email address or a Google account, they prefer to see those over, say, a Yahoo account. Again, I'm not exactly sure why, but some managers have indicated that it shows that you have technical savvy if you're using what they consider to be the best tools that are out there. Also including core competencies. So again, these would be areas that you feel like if your supervisor or anyone said to you, what are the areas where you feel like you have the greatest strength? Listing those up front are particularly important. Your education, and that includes any specific trainings or certifications that you've completed. If you're a PE, then certainly that would be something to include. If you have the project management certification or any other type of specific certification that is industry specific, that would give you a leg up in the hiring process, then certainly that should be included as well in your document. Again, relevant experience. And again, you can use the heading relevant experience to denote that not everything that you've done is going to be included, that you're only including the information relevant for the purposes that you're using the resume for. You can list accomplishments, and those accomplishments should be listed under each position. And they should really focus on what value you have added in your current position. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes. And also the skills that you want to bring forward. And this is important because at certain points in your career, particularly for mid-career professionals, you may want to move away from working in the way that you are currently working. You may want to take on more of a leadership position. You may want to take on more of a supervisory role of other engineers. Or you may want to move in a completely different direction. Listing the skills that you want to bring forward and not necessarily everything that you're good at helps to frame the message to an employer. One of the biggest mistakes that mid-career professionals make are listing everything that they have as competencies and not honing in on those competencies that they really want to utilize going forward. For example, worked recently with a civil engineer who was very well known in the firm as being the person that they would go to for all of the local zoning regulations and all of the sort of policy implications. That person was very good at that and served as a content expert within their firm, but they really wanted to move out of that role and more into a client-facing business development role. And so on their resume, they didn't put an overemphasis on their understanding of policy and procedure and requirements. They certainly listed it there, but they put more emphasis on their ability to build relationships. So that's just something to think about. This is a story that you are telling to individuals who may or may not know anything about you. And it is the question that you're answering is, what information do I need to provide to them so that they get a clear understanding of who I am, what accomplishments I've had, and where I'd like to go in the future. Now, again, there is no real requirement for including specific sections. The ones to always include are my recommendations to you. You can also include additional sections if the application warrants it. So for example, if you have specific honors or awards, if you would like to list significant projects that maybe you have had an opportunity to manage or that you've worked on, maybe they've been high profile, maybe you've done some consulting in your area and you'd like to include those consulting engagements, that would be perfectly appropriate as well. Any outside activities, any professional engagements, professional organizations that you're a member of, you'd like to include key competency statements, any presentations that you've made, if you have specific skills that you would like to include, whether those be language skills or technical skills, you can include that as well. And then obviously any industry specific information you can include too. So it's really up to you. Again, just like in storytelling, a resume is a marketing document, and you are trying to tell the best story that you can in the most concise way possible. So let's take a look at each section of the resume for just a moment, look at the nuts and bolts. So at the very top of your mid-career resume, we are encouraging you to include a career summary. And these summaries typically are a couple of lines that, again, will become evident to you in just a moment when I share the example. But it really serves as a filter where an individual can read your summary, again, 2 to 3 lines that really encapsulates who you are as a professional. It focuses on what you're known for or what you want to be known for. It includes major accomplishments or the value that you have added in your career that you can transfer to a new organization or to a higher level position. You can note the types of organizations, the industries where you have experience, and that will help to differentiate you from other candidates. And it's a place that some people, when they try to massage their statements too much, can include generic terms such as I'm a results-driven individual, I have a proven track record of. That's something that you want to stay away from in a career summary. There are a couple of helpful phrases that you can use as you're crafting your career summary. And let me just move on quickly to show you what one of those summaries may look like. So again, this is going to be one of the first things that appear on your resume. It actually appears after your contact information and before your experience or your education. And it can be labeled summary, it can be labeled profile. That's really up to you. So here is a sample of a statement, a career summary for somebody who is trying to position themselves within their current field, maybe to take on additional leadership responsibilities. This person indicates that they're a structural engineering manager with 20 years of experience leading teams in commercial infrastructure projects for local, state, national government entities, collaborating with builders, government officials, and other stakeholders to deliver projects in the $50 to $500 million range on time and on budget 95% of the time. So there are several things that are included in here. It shows breadth of experience in terms that this individual has 20 years of experience. They've included a leadership description and how they're describing who they are. They've quote unquote branded themselves as a structural engineering manager as opposed to just a technical expert in structural engineering. They've also talked about the fact that they have leadership experience working with teams. They've talked about who they've worked with, the types of problems that they solve, the scope of the projects that they've worked on, and then they also included a specific accomplishment here, which would be on-time delivery and on-budget delivery 95% of the time. So again, in a very short statement, you can learn a lot about an individual, and you could certainly make this more specific. You could dive a little bit deeper and include more information if you want to, but this is one example for someone who, again, is seeking to progress in a current position, perhaps to the next position above where they are currently. Now, here's an example of a career summary for someone who is seeking to make a pivot. Maybe they are currently a technical engineer and they are really looking to move more into a client-facing role. Maybe they want to move more into the sales aspect of a company. Maybe they want to be part of the team that actually generates the relationship with future clients. So this may be a very future-focused type of career summary, and you'll see the difference. Engineer, manager, and business development professional with 20 years of experience at top commercial firms. Responsible for successfully managing $5 billion in active projects each year and generating $500 million in additional business for the company through collaboration with internal and external partners. Recognized for ability to build relationships, manage complex projects, and anticipating challenges from a client's perspective. So again, they're trying to give a much higher level view of their experience. This could be the same person as the providing the summary as the person that we just looked at in the previous career summary sample. But they focus more on where they've worked. They're putting an emphasis here at the top commercial firms. They're trying to make themselves, again, stand out from others. They are also talking here about the totality of their responsibility. They put a specific emphasis here on business generation. And then they talk about what sets them apart. So specifically related to more of a sales or business management role, at the very end of this statement, they focus on relationship building, complex project management, and then being able to see and anticipate challenges from a client's perspective. Same person, two very different perspectives depending on what the position is. Again, this person may be seeking to pivot out of a line manager type of a role to more of a sales or specific infrastructure position within an organization. So that career summary is going to show up at the very top of your document. And then when we start talking about experience, one of the differences between a mid-career resume and an entry-level resume is you have the opportunity to include very specific accomplishment statements. Your statement should be measurable. So you should be able to include measurable performance of your outcomes that are qualified to the extent possible. You want to qualify and quantify as much as you can. So, that could be focusing on increasing revenue. It could be reducing time for, from the design phase to production. It could be, taking and reducing safety incidents over a 6-month period. Whatever that happens to be, typically you can find some measurable component to the work that you've done. Your accomplishment statements also should be specific. And again, sort of referring to these accomplishment statements, these are the bullet points that you're going to include underneath your current position and underneath your previous positions to sort of showcase the value that you added. Those statements should also be specific. They should identify a specific accomplishment that required extra effort, something that you're very proud of, or an example of something where you were recognized by colleagues, supervisors, customers, or others. And again, the focus here is really on value. What value did you achieve? What results were achieved by the tasks that you completed? One of the number one mistakes that anybody writing a resume at any level makes is that they don't focus on the value that's added. They simply list what their tasks were. Managed projects. We see that on a lot of resumes. Okay, great. But what was the value that you added? How did you manage differently than other people? What have you done, again, differently than perhaps some of your counterparts that makes your way of doing things just slightly better? What was the impact of the action that you had on the business? What was the benefit to the company, to the client, to the customer, and to the colleagues? If you include that information, I can guarantee that you will be definitely within the top 10% of applicants, because again, a good majority of people do not include the measurable, specific, and value-added information when they're talking about their previous experiences. One of the things to think about as you are developing these accomplishment statements is to use what we refer to as the CAR method, C-A-R. So the C standing for context. Always provide context, discuss any challenges that you faced, conditions that required your action, and then discuss the action that you took, whether it was alone or with others as part of a team, to make the accomplishment a reality. And then finally, based on the challenges that you faced, the actions that you took, what were the results that were achieved? So what was the impact of the action that you had on the business? What was the benefit to the company, the client, the customers, the colleagues, etc.? And if you use this almost like a formula and you overlay this over what you have on your current resume, it will help you figure out what you're missing. So you can very easily figure out where the gaps are in your current statements on your current resume. So here are a couple of sample bullet points using that CAR method. Led all phases of the project development lifecycle, from conceptualizing new product ideas through sketching, model creation, formal designs, prototyping, testing, and support for production and rollout of over 15 projects each year, generating over $25 million for the company. So that clearly tells you the situation that was occurring here. The action verb here is led, leadership. There was leadership in this area. And the actual value was that 15 projects were successfully rolled out each year, and there was a quantifiable value to the company in this particular area. The next one doesn't include any dollar amounts, but it certainly does show value that's added. So this particular person has the ability to hire, develop, and manage the company's design team of 20 engineers. And they also oversee the modeling, simulation, and analysis of structural components using these particular techniques. Now, not every bullet that you're going to include may have a very specific outcome at the end, but you can see that there was value added because this person was using their technical expertise to be able to do two things. They were able to lead and manage a group of people, and then they were also able to utilize specific industry-related technology to conduct their specific position. So one of the other things that I want to mention, and then I want to jump to the actual sample and give you an opportunity to take a look at that sample and walk you through that, is the importance of keywords in your document. One of the mistakes that people make is that they use the same document for every application. And that is one of the surest ways to get frustrated in any job search process, is to use the same document, to not tailor what you're writing. So that summary statement that we talked about at the very beginning, the career summary, as well as any of your accomplishment statements throughout your resume, should always be tailored based on the position that you're applying for. And I'll tell you why. If you look at this particular job description, this is one that I actually just pulled off the web today. So it's a mechanical engineering position for a large consulting firm, Booz Allen Hamilton. And one of the things that I encourage people to do is use the job description or the statement of work that's being provided to you as an opportunity to see if you're speaking the same language as the organization. So if you take a look very clearly at this, this area here, they're talking about the mechanical engineer's specific role. And you want to make sure that within your document, you have the terms perform routine design, fabrication, modification, and evaluation of these specific components. If you've not included the term subsystems or the term systems, if you've not completely included the entire process from design to evaluation, make sure that you're using the same terminology. So in many ways, you are actually looking to see if what you have provided checks all of the boxes for some of the important keywords that are being included on the job description. Now, sometimes, there may be a slight difference in the way that you describe something. I'll give you a very concrete example. Some people on their resumes may use the action word create. A lot of what people in your field do would be to create things or to solve problems through the creation of a new system, a new product, a new way of doing things. If you take a look at a job description and there's no use of the term create, instead they have develop, it may seem like a very small change to go through and update your resume to change the word create to develop, but I can guarantee you that two things happen. First, if your resume is being reviewed by, first and foremost, a computer, then it will pick up on the keywords. And you want to make sure that if your resume is going through a screening tool that many HR systems utilize at large organizations, even mid-level and smaller organizations now are utilizing this technology, then the fact that you have taken the time to change the keywords to match that which is found on the job description will mean that you have a higher percent match and have a much more likely possibility of being selected. The second thing that happens is you automatically begin using terminology that is included in that particular company's culture. And psychologically, you're making a stronger connection to the manager who's going to be able to read your document and read it in a way that utilizes terms that are familiar to them based on the type of work that they do. Every organization may describe a very similar process very differently. And it's important in order to make that connection with an organization to use their language. So to the extent possible, use the job description as a roadmap. And again, go ahead and change your resume for every position that you're applying for. Okay, at this point, I want to switch over and just take a look at the sample. Give me just a minute here. Okay, so on the screen right now is a template, and I should just pause for a moment and let you know that everybody on the call today is going to get a copy of both the presentation and the template. So not to worry about taking tons of notes here. You'll make sure to get all this information afterwards. But let me walk you through this template. And again, I'm not a huge fan of templates, but this gives you something to look at as you create your own document. So the concepts that we talked about are illustrated here. Your name appears at the very top of the document, and it should be among the largest things on your resume. The street address, your physical address, the city, state, and the zip code, or the country are optional. It used to be that these were always included, but there's really less importance on geography now, and so only including a telephone number and an email would be appropriate. Another quick tip that I will give you if you have not been in the job search for a while, go ahead and actually listen to the outgoing message on your voicemail to make sure that it is clear and professional. It's something that you would want an employer to hear if they were calling and could not reach you. It's often sometimes something that we just don't think about if we don't really need to make sure that what we're receiving in terms of a voicemail message is appropriate. So take time to do that. You can also include a LinkedIn URL if you happen to have a LinkedIn profile. Oftentimes, managers tell us that one of the first things that they do when they decide to bring an applicant in for an interview is they'll do an online search for them, and hopefully one of the first things that shows up for you is your LinkedIn profile. At the very top of the document, you can use this for what we call a Tier 1 title or statement. And there are two different things that you can do here. The first would be to include simply a title. So maybe the type of position that you're seeking falls in line with a senior engineering manager. It's a very generic term. Maybe you want to become more specific, and that's fine, but you can include a title here if that is important to you, or if that fully encompasses who you are and how you want to introduce yourself. The other thing that you can do here would be include 3 different descriptors that could describe you as a professional. So maybe the 3 things that you feel like you're best known for. In this case, engineering, leadership, and project management. Maybe those are the 3 key components that you want the reader to be able to see. Sometimes these are skill-based, other times they are managerial in nature. Sometimes they're simply just industry descriptors that might be important. The next is your professional summary. And this is really where that summary goes that we were talking about before, that I was showing you before, in terms of an actual statement. So that statement would go here, and you can actually include below that in the bullet point sections any core competencies that you want to include. Now, this is a great place to be able to pull the information from a job description and change these bullet points to match and showcase again that you have exactly what an organization is looking for. Again, this could take up the first third of your page, and it is something I think that's important. It is a lens through which any manager is going to be able to see very quickly who you are and what you have to offer. The bullet point format that's included here, make sure that that 20 seconds, that first thing that somebody reads, is going to entice them to want to read more throughout the rest of the document. Now, the next section that I've included on this example is education, and I've done so because you are all in an academic program, presumably, and if you're alum, perhaps you're a recent alum. But Education, typically for mid-career resumes, is included in this location if you are gaining an additional credential, or if you have specific training or a degree that would put you higher on someone's view, perhaps, than if you didn't include it. In many mid-career resumes, you will see this section if it is not speaking to a new degree that's being obtained. You'll see this toward the end of the document. So it really is at your discretion. If you feel like your experience prepares you more for the position that you're going for, then you can move your education to the bottom. Many people who are seeking to make a pivot and want to rely on their education and the skills that they've gained in their program to be able to move forward in a leadership role and a more senior technical role will often include the education section here. Now you can see how we've structured this, and there's something about consistency throughout the document. So, you know, any organization that you refer to, make sure that it's all in capital letters. If you do it once, do it through the rest of the document. You can see down here when we list the employer, that employer is all listed in capital letters. If you're bolding the title of your position or the title of a degree, just be consistent throughout. And make sure that you indicate the correct degree. So if it's a Master of Science or a doctoral degree in a certain area, you know, make sure to list those. You can also list here anything that might be unique to your academic experience. So if there were specific projects, if you worked with a faculty member to develop a product that is currently being considered for patent, anything that you might need to include here that maybe doesn't fit anywhere else, but certainly was an important part of your academic program. It could be research, could be fellowship, could be project, consulting, whatever. These things can be included in this particular section here. Now, one of the other things that we've done is to include the location of the university. And because many of you are virtual students, you are studying virtually. But in the case of your resume, you want to include the home location of the university where you're receiving the degree. If it's a new degree, then certainly you're going to want to list the anticipated date here. No need to use the term expected or anticipated. You can just simply list the expected graduation date here. And then go ahead and include any other academic credentials that you may have. An undergraduate degree, if you have another graduate degree, go ahead and include those. But these are in reverse chronological order. So the newest degree is listed first, followed by the next newest. And it's going to follow the same format here. You can include the degree awarded, any concentrations that you might have, and then any additional information, whether it's a thesis or something else. Any optional information that you can include would also be included here if it's related to certificates, certifications, or training of any kind. For example, this is where you might list the professional engineering credential that you may have. So again, your discretion as to where this is included, but for those of you who are seeking to utilize the degree as a significant reason or opportunity for you to make a move, then it would typically be listed next after the professional summary. Next is your professional experience. And again, your professional experience section should be inclusive of your opportunities that are relevant. So again, you could even call this relevant experience or relevant professional experience, whichever you choose to use in terms of a title. You're going to go back no more than 10 years in your experience. And in some cases, 5 to 7 years may be really appropriate. Again, what's the story that you want to tell, and what's the most important information for the reader to be able to see in order to determine whether or not you have what they're looking for. So we're going to include all of the basic information here: name of the current employer, where that employer is located, and the month and year of employment. If you're currently employed, then you would say to present. For some people, they choose to omit the month completely and just list the years of employment, and that's perfectly appropriate as well. This is where we begin to get into the accomplishment components that we talked about a bit earlier. So after you include your current title, and if there's a specific group, unit, or department that you work in that you want to list, you can certainly do that too. then you get into the opportunity to list these bullet points. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. One is to simply list 5 to 8 bullet points per position. Obviously, you're going to have more in your current position or your most recent position, and fewer the further back toward that 7 to 10 year threshold that we talked about would include. Now, again, there's a couple of ways to do that. You could simply just list 5 to 7 bullet points and use that CAR format that we talked about before. What is the context, what's the action that you took, and then what's the result? And you'll end up with some really good bullet points. Now, another way to do that is to actually chunk your bullet points based on some of the core competencies above. So if you actually want to take these core competencies that are here and showcase your accomplishments in those areas, you can also go ahead and set up your resume so that it includes these chunk sections. So what you might do here is you might list project management. And then you might have 2 or 3 bullet points under your project management section that really speaks to any accomplishments that you've had or anything that sets you apart, anything that differentiates you from someone else. You can go ahead and list those bullet points in this area. And then you might move on to do other areas as well. I suggest 4, maybe 5 of these headings would be appropriate. Again, if you're really trying to showcase particular core competencies. This is very helpful, again, for people who are trying to move out of what they're currently doing and show that they have skills in other areas that may not be as readily identified, maybe by current managers. This can also be helpful for people who are looking to move up in their current organization, because it allows hiring managers to see how you are putting a spin on your experience that might be different from what they know of you. So that's just something to think about. Again, if there's the next employer, you go ahead and list it in the same way. You can continue to format as above. Now, this happened, I made some changes here, so this came onto a second page, but you always want to label the top of your second page with your first name, your last name, and then page 2. The reason for that is if both pages happen to get separated for some reason, maybe they're, the manager prints a bunch of resumes at once and somehow the pages aren't connected, they're able to see which page goes with which candidate. If you have more than one position within the same employer, which many of you may have, you only need to list the employer once, and you only need to list the overall dates of employment in this particular instance. What this does is it shows consistency, and instead of including a number of different dates for each position that you've held, it shows your overall commitment to the company. So, for some individuals that are in your field, you might advance relatively quickly, maybe every 1 to 2 years, or maybe there's a bit longer span between your first entry and several other promotions. But what this does is it focuses more on your commitment to the actual company as opposed to your commitment in every specific position. Doing it this way also shows growth over time, which again, organizations love to see. That something was recognized by your previous employer to allow you to advance within the company. So all you need to do here, list the overall dates of employment, and if it's present, again, to current, the title, the unit or group or department, and then go ahead and include your bullet points here. And then move to the next position, and here you only need to list the title, the group, the unit. If you've got another position that's going to be included here, another employer, then the way that we note that a new employer starts, obviously, is because the formatting here is all in capital letters. So the next time we see the name of an organization all in capital letters, we'll know that that ends this particular entry. Now, you can include the specific dates if you want to show how long you were in each position. You certainly can do that. And when you're listing the bullet points here, don't be repetitive. So, think about the higher level skills that you've utilized in your current role. Maybe these focus more on project management, team leadership, maybe more complex technical skill. Use the information in the position below your current position to maybe list some of the regular duties and accomplishments that one may have in a position, but they're not certainly at the highest level, if that makes sense. So don't be repetitive. And if you only include 2 bullet points underneath the previous position and where you put most of your emphasis is on your current role, that's perfectly fine. Again, here's an example of additional information that can be included. You can customize this section as appropriate, or you can omit it completely. It's really up to you. But this is a great way to be able to include language skills, any specific leadership skills within the community or professional associations that you may be a part of, any major accomplishments related to work, if you've received any patents, if you've been published, any entrepreneurial ventures that you may have, any community components, and then interest. I think this is a really important one if you do choose to include additional information, because sometimes what helps you to stand out as you're being reviewed by a hiring manager are some of the things that you list as personal interest, whether that's antique cars or photography or cooking or gardening, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes that can resonate with the hiring manager, and it can be something that can be very useful. So that is a very quick overview of your mid-career resume. And I'm going to just sort of stop there at the moment. And just encourage you perhaps to ask any questions that you might have here. And so using the chat box over on the right-hand side, if you would like to ask questions, please feel free to do so. And I see that there are some questions that have already come in. So I'm going to just take a quick glance at these and see if I can provide a little bit of information. So one of the questions here focuses on the examples are way more than 3 lines. Why is that? So some of the descriptions that I've utilized and some of the bullet points can be more than 1 line. As long as they include that context, that information, I would encourage you to really think about making sure that they're robust bullet points. And if you only include 2 or 3 of them, that's fine. Just make sure that they leave, that they leave an impression. Okay, another question. How does the guidance to tailor the resume to each job description mesh with the opposing recommendation to use the same resume for similar job applications and tailor the cover letter? I will tell you, and again, I've been in career services for about 20 years. I have seen individuals who've done this both ways, and I know it is not concrete evidence, but I can tell you that the people who actually tailor both the resume and the cover letter are much more likely to find themselves in a position more quickly than if they only tailor a cover letter. The reason for that is because there are many employers that have indicated to us and recruiting conferences that I go to every year, some of these managers will say, I really skip right over the cover letter and I only look at the resume. And so if you're not taking the opportunity to really tailor the resume, you're missing those managers that aren't going to read the cover letter. And in many ways, the cover letter is more difficult to rewrite and tailor every time. But it is really worth your time. I can tell you that, I've had several clients over the years who come to me very frustrated because they've submitted many, many applications. And it's easy to do that given the online options that we have available. But what they were finding is that, they just simply weren't being called in for interviews. And one of the reasons was because a lot of their resumes were being, first reviewed by a computer, and they hadn't taken the time to focus on those keywords. In other cases, they simply weren't resonating with a particular hiring manager. So I really do encourage you, and best practice in the field right now is to tailor both the resume and a cover letter if you're going to use those. When applying for a career change, a different position with a company, would that be considered a pivot? I describe a pivot as doing something perhaps that's outside of the current trajectory of what you're already doing. So if you have served, for example, in a technical role, maybe you have led small teams, but you don't have a formal managerial or leadership role within the organization, pivoting to a director, let's say, or to a position that maybe splits your time, 60 to 80% on leadership and management and maybe only 20% on technical skill, that to me would be a pivot. I would also consider it a pivot if you are leaving behind your technical experience in one area and maybe moving to another. For example, a mechanical engineer client of mine that I was working with really started out on product development. And much of their first 5 years of their career was on product development for a specific healthcare organization where they were really sort of developing resources for that industry. They were picked up by another organization that was very interested in sort of their entrepreneurial spirit, their leadership ability, and they ended up moving away from product development and more to project management, but still within the engineering field as a whole. And so the emphasis was really on their project management skills in any setting and less on their technical experience. So that's what I would define as a pivot. What is the typical font and line spacing you suggest on a resume? The typical font that's being used now is Calibri, which I think comes with most Microsoft Word programs. It's sort of the new Times New Roman that's being used. And in sort of taking a look again, at the document, I would say your name is at a 14-point font. Your titles are at a 12-point font, and everything else can go at 11 or 10.5 is the smallest. Should you include our middle initial on your resume? You certainly can do that if you want to. It's really up to you. Some people include their full middle name. Some people will actually put at the end of their name, if they are PE, they will put that as a sort of an ending. They'll put their first and last name, comma, PE, and that's certainly appropriate if you want to do that as well. Good question about relevant classes. Should you include any relevant classes, perhaps from your current program? I would say yes, you can certainly do that if the skill that you've learned in that class, or if the outcome or the project that you have to turn in for that class is something that you've not otherwise been able to state somewhere on your resume. So for example, if you take a course that has helped you to learn a new technical skill, but you haven't had an opportunity to deploy that technical skill in the field just yet, then go ahead and list that relevant class. I wouldn't list every class, but I would certainly list classes that allow you to showcase something that is new. Question about using graphics on a resume, such as the company logo, the school seals, and certification placards. That would be something that I would encourage you to do on your LinkedIn profile. But the traditional resume is really just about the terminology that you're using. You don't want to include your photograph. You don't want to include any other personal information. And I would not include any of the graphic depictors that you have noted there. Now, there are some resources out there that talk about the graphic resume. I've not met an employer yet who actually likes the graphic resume in the sciences. So I would not encourage that. Does it help to state the specialization when mentioning your education? I think as much information as you can give about your education and how you are now qualified would be very appropriate. So I would certainly include that. If it is a leadership degree in engineering, but you focused your coursework on a particular area, certainly go ahead and state that. Do I recommend usage of bold formatted words to highlight salient points or keywords? Be very careful about where you use bold, italic, and underline. They're very, very powerful, and I think sometimes they can be overused in a resume. So make sure that, again, maybe you share this document with a couple of colleagues and ask them, what are the top 4 or 5 things that pop out to you? Based on their response, perhaps then you can go ahead and make adjustments. So I would say, certainly feel free to do that, but do it sparingly. and really, again, focus on creating a really good summary and following the overall format. Next question is, should the LinkedIn profile include everything that's on the resume, or should these be totally different in providing information? How do you decide what should be on LinkedIn versus what's on the resume? LinkedIn, you can be a little bit more creative. I actually like LinkedIn almost as a portfolio. And I think you can include information about projects that you've done. You can actually include project examples there. I tend to encourage people to use LinkedIn more as a total resume, everything that they've done, so that people can see the total progression. I think that that's a really helpful a tool to be able to include perhaps more information. Again, I think if you include that link on on your resume, what it allows a hiring manager to do is, again, because you've only included that relevant information, if they want to learn more about you, then they can go to the LinkedIn profile to be able to see more. LinkedIn profiles can be much more graphic, and I think that's really great. It also allows you to really provide a little bit more information. Maybe you do list a good majority of the classes that you took on your LinkedIn profile, but you're only listing those relevant ones on the actual resume. All right, I think I did miss a question up here. Is the Tier 1 title reflective of your current title or your job role? It can be. And let me just very quickly share the screen again so that I can show you what's being referred to here. So this is the Tier 1 statement that we're talking about. It can be a current title. It can be a generic statement like a senior engineering manager. Or it could be, as I said before, it could be 3 descriptors that you really want to be known for. If you want to be known for your engineering expertise, and maybe you list your specific area, biomedical engineering. Maybe you also want to list leadership. Maybe you want to list project management. These can also be connected to the type of position that you're looking for. Maybe if there is an emphasis on leadership or project management, maybe costing, cost approach. Maybe it's business development. Whatever you want to include here, do it in 3s. So you can certainly list a specific position or a more general position, or you can list 3 descriptors that you want to include here. Okay. So we do have a couple of Q&As, and I'll answer a couple of questions here as well. Where are some of the best places to look for a job besides Indeed, LinkedIn, and Simply Hired? And does Johns Hopkins have career fairs? I would say that professional associations are oftentimes an underutilized place to look for positions. So, every profession has a professional organization that provides professional development opportunities, conferences, and usually job boards. And so I would encourage you to take a look at those. Hopkins does have career fairs, and certainly that is a resource that you can utilize as well. The other thing, and this is a slightly different tactic, but it's one that I found works really well. If you actually start off your job search by making a list of anywhere between 10 and 20 organizations that you are interested in working for. So as opposed to looking first at the positions, focus first on the companies, and then go to their individual career sites, bookmark them, and use a tool like Google Docs or something else to be able to help you very quickly, maybe once a week, click on their search sites, their career sites, to be able to see what they have listed. That actually can be a little bit more strategic way to go about a search than simply using some of the LinkedIn or Indeed or Simply Hired sites that are out there, where you are getting positions, could be from any company, over a period of time. All right, I'm going to switch over. It looks like some people are also using the Q&A function, so I'm just going to see what I can find here from questions. Okay, some of these are similar. Good question. If you have an advanced degree beyond a master's, would it be okay to have a resume that's longer than 2 to 3 pages? If you get beyond the 2 to 3 pages, that in my mind turns from a resume into a curriculum vitae, or a CV for short. Those would be very appropriate if you're going into research positions, if you're going into positions in academia, and that's a whole nother area that we would approach slightly differently. If you have a PhD and are looking at industry positions, then I would encourage you to stick to the 1 to 2 page format, and again, only include the relevant information. If you're going for research-based positions, where it would be helpful to list your scholarship, where it would be helpful to list publications or specific consulting projects, if you're looking for positions in academia or think tanks or professional associations, then I would say yes, it turns in more to a CV at that point, and that's what I would encourage. Do you recommend tailoring a resume differently for a large company versus a startup? Typically, my experience at startups is that the skills that are going to be valued there are flexibility, are the ability to work outside of a defined job description. So yes, I would encourage you to use slightly different language. You're going to want to be a little less prescribed about the type of work that you do, and you're probably going to want to include a wider range of experiences when you list your core competencies in that area. Because really what's valued at startup companies is innovation, the ability to do multiple things at once, the ability to work with a wide range of people, step in when necessary. You get the idea. Other than generic or non-descriptive words, are there any words to always avoid? In the example that I showed you, you'll notice that there was no personal pronouns, so you certainly don't want to include the term I, he, she, any of those. And always try to keep what you're describing positive. I have seen, it sounds a little funny, but I've seen some resumes that read it very negatively, where they're always talking about specific problems rather than solutions. So think about the language that you're using and make sure that you're putting a positive spin on what you're talking about. Should we send resumes to job search sites only and not to employers? In other words, is unsolicited resumes frowned upon? Certainly, if you want to update or upload a regular resume to a job search site, oftentimes recruiters will use those, so you certainly can do that. Unsolicited resumes are okay if they're accompanied perhaps by an introduction. Hopkins has a great network, and so one of the things that I encourage you to do is to use the search function on LinkedIn to try to identify people who are either working for current employers that you want to target, or maybe working in a certain geographic region in the area that you have expertise in, and perhaps reaching out to them, asking them, if you can pick their brain for 5 to 10 minutes. Networking is not always something that's easy, but I can tell you, getting back to the point where managers are telling us that it's becoming harder and harder to hire, if you can get an internal referral from somebody who maybe you don't know, but who has some sort of connection with you, like a Hopkins degree, that is something that is really golden, particularly in mid to large companies, where your skills are going to be valued, but where managers are just having a hard time picking who to bring in. If you can get somebody, that they trust, and that they've seen has contributed, actually make a recommendation. I'd like to push along Richard's resume, for example. He's also a graduate of the program at Hopkins. That will actually go a long way. So if you are reaching out to people who are within your network, then it would be perfectly appropriate. If there's a company that you really are very interested in working for, and you can, first of all, get a phone conversation or have an email exchange with someone, once you establish that connection, sending them your resume and simply saying, I wanted to make sure that you had a bit of information about me, so I've included as an attachment a PDF of my resume. Obviously, anytime you upload a resume to a job board, to any type of applicant tracking system, or if you're sending it by email, I always encourage you to do it in PDF, only because all of the formatting that you've spent so much time working on actually will stay intact. Now, there are some sites that will not allow you to upload a PDF, and obviously you have to figure that out in terms of maybe a Word document or copying and pasting, but most will allow PDFs at this point. Okay, I realize we've pretty much hit the 8 o'clock mark, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Hopefully I've answered a good chunk of questions. As I said before, we will make sure that everybody on the call today will get a copy of the presentation as well as the template itself, in case those are helpful to you. Again, I hope that this has been useful. I hope that you'll give some feedback to Alyssa and to others, and we look forward from the Career Center's perspective to continuing to support your professional development into the future. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.